My name is Ethan Moore. I'm 41 years old, and up until 8 months ago, I believed my life was built on something solid. We lived in Scottsdale, Arizona. Clean streets, controlled chaos. The kind of place where success looks effortless and everyone pretends stability is permanent. I managed private investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients. My entire career revolved around identifying risk before it became disaster. I studied patterns, anomalies, behavior shifts. I was trained to see what others ignored. What I wasn't trained for was detecting deception in my own marriage. Nicole and I had been married for 12 years. No dramatic fights. No public scandals. From the outside, we looked disciplined, organized, functional. We hosted dinners, took curated vacations, posted just enough on social media to signal happiness without oversharing. But if I'm honest, the first sign wasn't loud. It was a number, a line item, a quiet, unemotional transaction that should have meant nothing. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing our joint account activity, not because I suspected anything, but because that's what I do. Numbers calm me. They tell the truth when people don't. That's when I saw it. A charge from the Montclair House, a luxury boutique hotel in downtown Phoenix. $1,284.73. The amount itself wasn't the issue. We could afford it. What caught my attention was the date and location. Nicole had told me she was attending a networking mixer in Tempe that evening, an industry event with a panel discussion and cocktails. She'd left around 6. Said she'd be home by 11. She came home at 11:42 p.m. I remember because I glanced at the clock when I heard the garage door. There was no mention of staying overnight. No mention of Phoenix. No reason for a high-end hotel. I didn't confront her immediately. I'm not impulsive. I let the information sit. I checked her calendar. Tempe event confirmed. No overnight booking listed. No travel expense reimbursement submitted. Still, there are always explanations. Traffic. Overbooked hotels near the venue. A colleague splitting a room. By the time dinner rolled around, I had convinced myself it was probably nothing. Probably. We were halfway through grilled salmon when I brought it up. I kept my tone light, casual, neutral. "Hey," I said, cutting into my food. "Quick question. What was the Montclair charge from Saturday?" It was subtle, but I saw it. A fractional pause. Her fork hovered midair before she placed it down. "Oh, that." She exhaled like I'd asked about dry cleaning. It was easier to stay downtown after the event. I didn't want to drive back late. Reasonable. Except the event wasn't downtown. It was in Tempe, right? I asked, still calm. "Why Phoenix?" That's when the temperature shifted. Her posture stiffened. Shoulders squared. Eye contact sharpened. "Are you auditing me now?" she asked, voice tightening. "Is that what this is?" The speed of the escalation surprised me. "No, I just noticed." "You noticed? Or you were looking?" She interrupted. "You've been on edge for months, Ethan. Ever since that Rothman portfolio issue, you've been obsessing over control." The conversation was no longer about the hotel. It was about me, my stress, my job, my supposed paranoia. "I asked a simple question," I said carefully, "and I gave you a simple answer." She's *T back. "But apparently that's not enough for you." I felt the subtle pivot happen in real time. This wasn't a discussion. It was repositioning. "You think I'm lying?" she asked. I hadn't said that, but now I was defending against it. "That's not what Because if you don't trust me, just say that," she continued, voice rising. "Don't hide it behind financial oversight like I'm some line item you need to reconcile." There it was. Control. Distrust. Burnout. In less than 3 minutes, the focus had shifted from a hotel charge to my character flaws. And the worst part? She sounded convincing, controlled, slightly wounded, offended but not hysterical. Just enough emotion to make me question myself. Maybe I was projecting stress. Maybe I was being rigid. Maybe after years of managing volatile portfolios, I had started treating everything like potential risk. She leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "You don't get to make me feel guilty for going to a professional event," she said. "If you're struggling at work, don't turn me into the problem." That sentence stayed with me. If you're struggling at work. The implication was clear. This wasn't about her. This was about me unraveling. And somehow, by the end of it, I found myself apologizing. "I didn't mean it like that," I said. "I was just trying to understand." She softened slightly then. "Not fully. Just enough." "Then trust me," she replied. "I shouldn't have to defend every decision." The conversation ended there. On the surface, it resolved cleanly. No shouting. No dramatic exits. She finished her wine. I cleared the plates. Later that night, she curled up beside me like nothing had happened. Warm. Familiar. Normal. But I couldn't sleep. Because the explanation made sense. And yet it didn't. It wasn't the hotel that bothered me anymore. It was the choreography. The immediate deflection. The reframing. The way the question never got fully answered, only redirected. In my profession, when someone responds to a specific inquiry by attacking the premise instead of clarifying the detail, it's rarely accidental. I replayed her tone in my head. The fractional pause. The defensive escalation. The character assessment. She hadn't reassured me. She'd disarmed me. And what unsettled me most was this. For the first time in 12 years, I felt like I was negotiating with my wife. Not talking. Negotiating. Everything she said was technically plausible. Nothing was provably false. But something underneath it felt constructed. Manufactured. Like the explanation had been prepared before the question was asked. I remember staring at the ceiling that night, the glow from the hallway light barely cutting through the dark. I told myself I was overthinking. Told myself long marriages require trust. Told myself stress can distort perception. But beneath all the rationalizations, there was a quiet, persistent sensation I couldn't shake. Not anger. Not jealousy. Something colder. The awareness that the dynamic had shifted, and I hadn't seen it coming. That hotel charge wasn't just a transaction. It was the first moment I realized I might not be seeing the full picture. And once you start questioning the frame, every detail begins to matter. After that dinner, I didn't turn into a jealous husband. I turned into an analyst. That's the difference. I didn't accuse. I didn't snoop through drawers or demand passwords. Outwardly, I stayed the same. Calm. Predictable. Supportive. But internally, something had activated, the part of me that tracks inconsistencies for a living. And once that part wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. Over the next few days, I found myself replaying the last several months in my head. Not emotionally, but structurally. Like reviewing archived footage frame by frame. Patterns started surfacing. Small ones at first. Nicole's schedule had changed gradually, almost invisibly. What used to be 2 or 3 evening events per month had become weekly industry gatherings. Late client dinners, panel rehearsals, private strategy sessions. At the time, I admired her drive. Now I questioned the volume. There were new calendar blocks labeled vaguely. Off-site, consult, roundtable. No company names. No detailed locations. Just placeholders. Then there was the phone. 3 months ago, she upgraded to a new one. I remember because she insisted on picking it up alone instead of having it delivered. Carrier mix-up, she said. After that, her notifications disappeared from the lock screen. I didn't notice immediately. You don't audit your spouse's phone settings. But one evening I glanced over while she was texting and saw nothing. No previews. No banner alerts. Just a blank screen lighting up. When I asked why, she shrugged. Privacy update. New software. It sounded reasonable. Now it felt strategic. She also developed a habit of taking calls in her car. That one bothered me in retrospect. We used to answer calls anywhere, kitchen, couch, backyard. But suddenly, certain calls required better reception. She'd step outside, close the garage door, sit in the driver's seat for 15 minutes. The first time, I assumed it was work confidentiality. By the 4th time, it was routine. Then there was the tone shift. Nicole had always been patient with questions. We built our marriage on open dialogue. But gradually, neutral inquiries started triggering irritation. Where's the event tonight? You already asked. What time will you be home? I don't know, Ethan. Why does everything need a timestamp? The defensiveness didn't arrive all at once. It layered itself slowly, like sediment. And I accepted it. Because stress explains everything if you let it. I was busy too. My firm was restructuring portfolios. Markets were volatile. We were both stretched thin. But int asterisk Macy changed as well. Not dramatically, just enough. Physical closeness became scheduled instead of spontaneous. Kisses felt brief. Distracted. She started falling asleep facing away from me, claiming exhaustion. I told myself long marriages evolve. But affection doesn't evaporate without cause. Then came the purchases. Subtle upgrades. A designer handbag I hadn't seen before. New heels still in the box. Jewelry that didn't match anything she already owned. When I complimented them, she said, "Old bonus points. I forgot to mention. Forgot to mention." That phrase repeated itself often. I forgot to mention the dinner ran long. I forgot to mention we changed venues. I forgot to mention I'll be out of town next Thursday. For someone meticulous about details, she was suddenly forgetful. Trips were another anomaly. Twice in the past 4 months. She returned from short work trips without photos. Nicole documents everything: sunsets, hotel lobbies, cocktails. But those trips? Nothing. When I asked how Chicago was, she said, "Cold," and changed the subject. No stories, no anecdotes, no complaints about flight delays. Just silence. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon when she was in the shower and her phone buzzed repeatedly on the counter. I didn't touch it. I didn't even look directly at it. But I saw the screen light up. No name, just a number. And instead of curiosity, what I felt was something worse. Recognition. Recognition that this wasn't random. It was patterned. And once the pattern became visible, I couldn't unsee it. There was also a change in how she dressed for certain events. Not inappropriate. Not obvious. Just elevated. Networking mixers now required meticulous styling. Specific dresses. Specific fragrance. A different tone of makeup. One night, as she adjusted her earrings in the mirror, I asked lightly, "Big crowd tonight?" She smiled but didn't meet my eyes. Just important people. Important. That word echoed. I started tracking her return times, not obsessively, just noting. The consistency was interesting. She rarely came home early from these events. Always between 11:30 and midnight. Predictable unpredictability. That's what it felt like. And through all of this, she remained affectionate in public. Held my hand at charity events. Leaned into me during photos. Called me my rock in front of friends. Which made the private distance harder to categorize. If there had been screaming or open hostility, I could have labeled it. Instead, it was refinement, adjustment, calibration, like someone slowly reorganizing their life while ensuring the furniture didn't scrape the floor too loudly. The more I reviewed, the more impossible it became to dismiss. Individually, each change was explainable. Together, they formed structure. The hotel charge hadn't created suspicion. It had illuminated it. And what unsettled me most wasn't the possibility of infidelity. It was the possibility that I had been living beside a parallel version of my wife, one that operated in compartments I never saw. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me methodical. If there was a pattern, there would be proof. If there was proof, there would be timing. And if there was timing, there would be intention. That's when I understood something clearly. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was sustained, deliberate, managed. And the longer I replayed the past months in my mind, the more one truth solidified. Whatever was happening didn't begin at that hotel. The hotel was just the first mistake. And people who are careful don't make mistakes without reason. The confirmation didn't come from rage. Came from timing. 3 weeks after the hotel charge, Nicole mentioned another strategy dinner. Downtown this time. Phoenix again. She said it casually while scrolling through her phone, like it was administrative. "I'll probably be late," she added. "Don't wait up." That phrase again. Don't wait up. I nodded. Outwardly, nothing changed. I kissed her on the cheek before she left. Told her to drive safe. But this time I didn't stay home. I waited 10 minutes after she pulled out of the driveway before getting into my own car. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt precise. If there was nothing to see, I'd see nothing. If there was something, I'd finally stop guessing. She drove confidently. No hesitation. No wandering. Straight toward downtown Phoenix. Not toward a cluster of office towers. Toward the Montclair house. The same hotel from the charge. My pulse didn't spike. It slowed. She handed her keys to valet. Smoothed her dress. Checked her reflection in the tinted window. Then he appeared. Mark Reynolds. I knew him. Financial consultant. Mid-40s. Clean reputation. We'd sat across from each other in closed investment meetings at least 3 times over the past year. Not close friends, but familiar enough to exchange firm handshakes and industry jokes. Seeing him step toward my wife didn't feel cinematic. It felt procedural. They didn't act surprised. They didn't look around. He kissed her on the cheek. Not awkwardly, not cautiously. *mately, like repetition had removed hesitation. His hand rested at the small of her back as they walked inside. That's when the guessing ended. I parked across the street, engine still running. For a full minute, I stared at the hotel entrance. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a networking dinner that drifted into something ambiguous. This was practiced. I didn't storm in. That's the part people expect. But anger is loud, and loud mistakes destroy leverage. Instead, I pulled up the parking app and extended my meter. Then I waited. 37 minutes later, I saw a hotel attendant escort them toward the elevator corridor. No luggage, no paperwork, just proximity. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when something becomes undeniable. It's not explosive, it's sterile. All the emotional noise drains out, replaced by clarity. I drove home without music. When she returned at 11:58 p.m., she walked in with the same composed expression she'd worn for months. "How was your night?" she asked lightly, placing her purse on the counter. "Quiet," I replied. That word hung between us. Quiet. She poured herself a glass of water. Didn't elaborate. Didn't offer details about the dinner. I watched her carefully. There was no guilt in her posture. No tremor in her voice. Just routine. Which meant this wasn't new. The following week confirmed it wasn't isolated. I tracked nothing illegally. I followed nothing obsessively. I simply observed. Her schedule aligned perfectly with Mark's public calendar. Industry events, consulting appearances, private sessions. On Thursday, she claimed a late panel rehearsal. Mark's firm hosted a closed-door advisory meeting that same night at the Montclair. Saturday brunch with colleagues? Mark posted a filtered Skyline sh*T from the same rooftop restaurant at 11:17 a.m. The alignment was too precise to dismiss. Still, I needed one more confirmation. Not for proof. For finality. The next time she mentioned a late event, I arrived earlier. Different entrance. Different vantage point. This time, I didn't stay in the car. I entered the lobby and positioned myself near the bar, partially shielded by a column. At 8:12 p.m., Nicole stepped out of the elevator. Not from the street. From upstairs. Her hair slightly altered. Lipstick refreshed. Mark followed 30 seconds later. They weren't discussing business. They were laughing. The kind of laugh you don't manufacture. He adjusted the strap of her purse. She touched his wrist casually. There it was. Repetition. Comfort. History. They walked past me without noticing. I could have spoken her name. I could have stopped them. Instead, I let them exit. Because confrontation at that moment would have given her room to react emotionally. And emotion clouds evidence. I left 5 minutes later. Sat in my car. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to feel it. Not jealousy. Not even heartbreak. Something colder. Replacement. I had been replaced in portions of her life I didn't even know were open for vacancy. What struck me most wasn't that she had an affair. It was that she had engineered it within proximity to my professional world. Mark wasn't a random stranger. He knew who I was. He'd shaken my hand, looked me in the eye, and scheduled private meetings with my wife afterward. That wasn't impulsive desire. That was coordination. I drove home and opened my laptop. Cross-referenced timelines, investment meetings, Nicole's calendar, hotel charges. They overlapped more often than coincidence allows. This wasn't reckless. It was structured, and structure means planning. By the time she came home that night, I had already accepted it. The affair wasn't speculative. It wasn't emotional confusion. It was active, sustained, repeated. She kissed my cheek before bed. Same as always, and I understood something with absolute clarity. The betrayal wasn't the secret. The secret was how long she believed I would never see it. That was the real insult. And once certainty replaces doubt, everything changes. Not explosively, strategically. I didn't confront her. That's the part most people don't understand when I tell this story. They assume I exploded, packed a bag, threw accusations across the kitchen like shattered glass. I didn't. I adjusted. Because once something becomes undeniable, emotion becomes optional. Strategy becomes essential. The morning after I saw them leave the elevator together, I made her coffee like always, asked about her upcoming week, listened while she described fabricated meetings with smooth precision. She lied effortlessly, and I realized something important. She believed she was ahead. That belief was leverage. If I confronted her immediately, she would pivot again. Tears, confusion, maybe partial truth wrapped in victimhood. The narrative would become messy. Instead, I gave her silence. Not cold silence. Controlled silence. I kissed her goodbye before work. I maintained routine. Meanwhile, I started documenting every transaction, every calendar overlap, every hotel charge, every public appearance Mark posted that aligned with her events. I wasn't building a revenge file. I was building a timeline. There's power in chronology. It removes emotion and exposes repetition. Within 2 weeks, the pattern was airtight. Hotel bookings corresponded with her industry panels. Private dining charges matched his firm's off-site advisory sessions. Even rideshare receipts mirrored his travel schedule. This wasn't sporadic. It was coordinated, and coordination suggests shared intention. But something else began to surface as I dug deeper. Transfers, small ones at first. Consulting payments routed into an LLC I recognized, Reynolds Strategic Holdings. Mark's firm. Nicole had quietly shifted advisory contracts from her side projects into partnerships connected to him. The amounts weren't massive individually, but cumulatively, substantial. And more interestingly, those payments were structured in a way that implied future expansion. They weren't just seeing each other. They were aligning professionally. That's when I understood something unsettling. The affair wasn't purely emotional. It was strategic, which meant I needed to think further ahead. I contacted a forensic accountant, discreetly, framed it as a routine audit preparation. I didn't mention Nicole. I mentioned risk mitigation. He found nothing illegal, but he did confirm what I suspected. She had positioned herself to access advisory capital pools tied indirectly to my firm's extended network. Specifically, a $5 million investment pool under a discretionary structure, one that only I had final authorization over. Mark had likely assumed proximity equaled influence. He was wrong. Nicole, however, seemed to believe the transition of control was inevitable. That's when the quiet anger arrived. Not because she was unfaithful, but because she underestimated me. Outwardly, our marriage continued unchanged. We attended a charity dinner 2 weeks later. She wore emerald green, held my arm, introduced me as the steady one. I smiled for photographs, played my role, because at this point I was living 2 lives, the husband and the observer. At night, when she fell asleep, I reviewed documentation. I saved *TS. I I archived bank statements. I requested updated legal summaries for my investment structures. Not impulsively, thoroughly. The more I reviewed, the clearer the long-term trajectory became. Mark expected access. Nicole expected shared authority. They were positioning themselves for a financial merge. Not through theft, through assumption. Assumption that emotional leverage would translate into business leverage. They believed I was the variable. They believed that eventually, through divorce or persuasion, control would shift. That belief was their mistake. Because control of the $5 million pool wasn't marital property in the way they assumed. It was structured through layered discretionary authority tied to my signature alone. Even in divorce, access would require procedural triggers they didn't anticipate. The irony? If Nicole had asked me honestly to restructure for her own independent ventures, I might have considered it. But deception alters generosity, and strategy requires patience. So I waited. I let her continue. I let Mark continue. The more confident they became, the more visible their coordination grew. She stopped hiding her phone as carefully, stopped reacting defensively to questions. When someone believes they've secured an outcome, vigilance drops. That's human nature. I also began observing Mark more closely at industry events. He avoided prolonged eye contact, overcompensated with friendly professionalism. Once, during a closed investment meeting, he referenced future collaborative capital flexibility. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at Nicole. Subtle, but telling. I understood then that this wasn't an affair spiraling toward chaos. It was two people building what they believed was a future, one that assumed I would either remain unaware or become irrelevant. And that clarity shifted something inside me. This was no longer about betrayal. It was about narrative control. If I confronted too early, I'd appear reactive. If I acted too late, I'd appear naive. Timing would determine outcome, so I let the illusion mature. I encouraged her networking. I approved travel expenses without comment. I even complimented Mark's firm publicly, because confidence makes people careless. Meanwhile, I consulted quietly with my attorney, not to file, to prepare. Asset protection, structural review, contingency clauses. Everything remained within legal and ethical boundaries. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was preparing to reveal them. And the most powerful part? They believed they were winning. I could see it in her posture, in his tone during meetings, in the way they no longer moved cautiously in the hotel lobby. They thought the transition was smooth. They thought I was distracted. But the truth was simple. When someone underestimates you, you don't interrupt them. You document them. And when the time is right, you let their own confidence dismantle them. By the end of that month, I had everything I needed. Not to accuse, to execute. Because sometimes the most effective move isn't confrontation. His patience sharpened into inevitability. Confidence changes posture. I noticed it first in Nicole. There was a subtle shift in her energy, not guilt, not anxiety. Something closer to anticipation. She moved through the house like someone who had already made peace with an outcome I hadn't been informed about. She became less careful with scheduling, less guarded with explanations. Not reckless, just relaxed. Relaxation only comes when someone believes the difficult part is over. Mark changed too. At industry meetings, he spoke more boldly. Used phrases like future alignment and structural expansion. He referenced capital flexibility in ways that suggested access. Access he didn't actually have, but access he clearly expected. The $5 million investment pool had become the silent centerpiece of their imagined future. That pool wasn't liquid cash sitting in an obvious account. It was structured capital, layered, protected, discretionary. Private clients. Complex authorization protocols. Legal triggers that required specific signatures and procedural sequences. My signature, and only mine. But from the outside, especially to someone close to the marriage, it could appear jointly influenced. Nicole had sat beside me during client dinners. She understood its scope, its weight, its potential. If she believed a divorce would automatically redistribute influence, I could see how that assumption would form. If Mark believed proximity to her translated into proximity to capital, I could see how his confidence grew. That was their illusion. And illusions are dangerous when no one corrects them. One afternoon, I overheard a fragment of a call. Nicole was in the backyard. Her voice low, measured. "Yes, but once the transition happens, it won't matter," she said. "It's structured, but it's not immovable." I didn't need to hear the rest. Transition. Structured but not immovable. They were planning for a shift. I walked outside casually, and she ended the call immediately. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just contract stuff," she replied smoothly. Contract stuff. That phrase would have meant nothing to me months ago. Now it was a tell. The more I reviewed financial movements, the clearer the narrative became. Nicole had positioned herself as an independent consultant under a new advisory structure, loosely connected to Mark's firm. The paperwork was clean, legal, thoughtfully drafted, but its timing was precise. The LLC formation occurred 3 weeks after the first hotel charge. Initial capital contributions aligned with dates of their overnight stays. Even more interesting, preliminary documents referenced projected access to a supplemental capital pool pending restructuring. That supplemental pool? Mine. Or rather, the one I managed. They weren't stealing. They were anticipating. Anticipation can be more revealing than action. It meant they believed control would transfer, either through persuasion, partnership, or divorce leverage. The arrogance wasn't in the affair. It was in the forecast. They had built projections based on the assumption that I would be either unaware or emotionally destabilized enough to concede. But I wasn't destabilized. I was observing. I scheduled a meeting with my attorney under the guise of portfolio restructuring. We reviewed the capital structure of the $5 million pool carefully, clause by clause. Authorization protocols were ironclad. Even in the event of divorce, control remained discretionary unless I voluntarily reassigned oversight. No automatic distribution, no passive transfer. The legal authority remained entirely with me. That was the moment the power dynamic clarified fully. They thought they were ahead. They thought proximity equaled inevitability. They believed their confidence was invisible. But confidence leaves footprints. One evening, Nicole mentioned hypothetically exploring joint expansion ventures in the next fiscal year. Joint, expansion, venture, words chosen carefully. Interesting, I said neutrally. With who? She hesitated half a second. Still early, she replied. Just exploring. Exploring. The language of someone building a future without informing the present. Mark grew bolder publicly too. At a closed advisory dinner, he referenced new leadership shifts in legacy portfolios. Legacy portfolios. He glanced at me briefly when he said it. Testing. Measuring. Maybe even taunting. But what he didn't know was that I had already moved quietly. I began restructuring minor elements of the capital pool. Legally, transparently, but strategically. Adjusted discretionary review timelines. Added compliance review layers. Introduced audit checkpoints. On paper, it was routine risk management. In practice, it ensured that any attempt to position the pool for external influence would trigger scrutiny. I didn't freeze anything. Not yet. Freezing too early would reveal awareness. Instead, I allowed their confidence to deepen. Nicole became almost gentle with me during this phase. Overly considerate. Suggestive of long-term planning. Discussing travel next year. Talking about evolution in relationships. It was subtle narrative preparation. She was mentally transitioning. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't fighting the transition. I was letting it mature. Because illusions collapse harder when fully formed. The night I confirmed Mark had filed preliminary documentation projecting advisory alignment with Nicole's LLC was the night I understood the scale of their expectation. He had already drafted proposals anticipating capital under management. Projected numbers that included my pool. Projected access he did not have. Projected authority he assumed would transfer. They were building spreadsheets on a foundation that didn't exist. And that kind of miscalculation isn't emotional. It's structural. The irony was almost clinical. They believed everything was legally secured in their favor. They believed timing was on their side. They believed I was the unaware constant in their equation. But equations fail when one variable isn't predictable. And I had stopped being predictable the moment I saw them leave that elevator together. They thought they were preparing to win. They didn't realize they were documenting their own overreach. Because sometimes the most powerful position isn't confronting the lie. It's allowing someone to build their confidence so high that when gravity finally returns, the fall isn't negotiable. And by then I was ready. I chose the timing carefully. Not during an argument. Not during a quiet evening at home. I waited until Mark formally submitted projections tied to capital he didn't control and Nicole referenced final transition steps. That was the moment. Within a single business day, I initiated a compliance review on the $5 million pool. Routine on paper. Devastating in effect. Funds were temporarily frozen pending structural audit. External advisory connections were flagged. Mark's projected access triggered internal scrutiny. By afternoon, his firm was under formal review for misrepresented capital alignment. By evening, Nicole received notice that any associated entities connected to her new LLC were part of that inquiry. No yelling, no confrontation, just paperwork. They believed they were hours away from expansion. Instead, they were hours away from exposure. I never raised my voice. I simply removed the ground beneath their assumptions. The divorce was quiet. Nicole didn't fight. She couldn't. The investigation into Mark's projections ended his advisory credibility. Her partnership dissolved with it. The future they'd built in private collapsed under public compliance review. When I filed, I did so calmly. No dramatics. No personal attacks. The legal authority over the capital remained with me. Always had. She looked shocked. Not that I knew, but that I had waited. Mark lost clients. Nicole lost the illusion of leverage. Neither lost everything. But they lost what they thought they'd already secured. As for me, I kept my reputation, my assets, my stability, and I learned something simple. The strongest move isn't revenge. It's patience. Long enough to let someone believe they've already won.